Welcome back to the deep dive. So if you're involved in building digital solutions, you've definitely heard of the MVP, the minimum viable product.
Right. It's standard practice in tech.
But what happens when the environment isn't just about market share, but potentially, well, life and death situations? Today, we're wading into healthcare development.
Yeah, the high stakes world.
Exactly. Whether you're inside a giant hospital system or trying to launch a nimble health tech startup, you're facing really tight budgets, huge patient expectations, and these massive regulatory pressures. Think high pay, GDPR.
Yeah.
The consequences for messing up are just catastrophic.
It really is the ultimate high wire act. And our mission today, as we dig into the source material, is to explore why building an MVP first in healthcare isn't just, a good idea for saving money.
It's more than that.
Oh, yeah, it's fundamental. It's about tackling clinical risk and nailing regulatory compliance right from the very beginning. It basically flips the usual development playbook on its head.
That flip. That's interesting. So normally an MVP is what, the simplest version that gets early users happy?
Pretty much. Get it out there, learn, iterate.
But in healthcare, it sounds like it has to be the version that satisfies those early users and guarantees patient safety and data privacy, all at once.
Precisely. So maybe your first version is just, say, basic teleconsultation scheduling. Simple enough.
Yeah, okay.
But that simple scheduler absolutely must be HIPAA compliant from minute one. No compromises there.
Got it. So the constraints really define the product from the outset.
They do. You're juggling speed, you're trying to minimize investment, but you're slammed against these rigid compliance rules, patient safety requirements, usability needs for staff who are already burnt out.
And connecting to ancient IT systems, right?
Exactly. Decades of legacy IT. You just cannot cut corners on safety or privacy to rush a launch. The V is viable here. It really means clinically viable, not just commercially viable.
Okay, so let's nail down the key traits. Core function, only like that scheduler example. Lean design, built for feedback. Iterative, obviously. And crucially, compliance has to be woven right into the fabric.
Built in, not bolted on. Privacy by design.
Right, privacy by design, not privacy as an afterthought. Okay, let's unpack this, because the reasons why a huge hospital needs this are probably quite different from why a startup does, even if the solution, the MVP, looks similar.
The why is different, absolutely, but what the MVP approach ends up being the same essential tool. For hospitals, a lot of it comes down to inertia and, frankly, avoiding catastrophic costs.
Hospitals are just these enormous, complex beasts, aren't they? You've got doctors, nurses, IT folks managing systems older than I am, legal teams, everyone with different priorities.
And terrified of compliance failures. Plus, the legacy systems, EHRs, imaging platforms. If a new system rollout fails, patient care can literally grind to a halt.
Wow.
So for hospitals, the number one benefit of an MVP is massive risk mitigation. Just think about the potential costs. Imagine a hospital committing, say, $50 million to build some huge, all-singing, all-dancing clinical decision support system. But it's based on assumptions about how doctors will actually use it. And maybe those assumptions are wrong. If it fails adoption, or worse, causes a critical clinical error. The financial hit, the damage to their reputation, it's staggering.
I remember seeing stats about healthcare data breaches. Wasn't the average cost something like over $10 million per breach? That puts failure in a whole different league compared to, say, retail tech.
It absolutely does. And that $10 million figure, that's often just the immediate hit, the fines, the notification costs. It doesn't even touch the loss of patient trust, the years of legal battles that can follow.
So the MVP lets them test the waters safely.
Exactly. Test it in one small clinic, maybe a single department, validate how users really behave, check the compliance aspects in a contained way, avoid that massive gamble of a full rollout. It's controlled experimentation.
And it also gets them value sooner, right? You mentioned faster time to value. These big hospital IT projects can drag on for years.
5 years is not unusual, but they need improvements now. They need to cut wait times, maybe optimize how they allocate beds or staff. An MVP gets a usable tool out there delivering some real measurable relief, often in months, not years.
Which must help with getting everyone on board.
That's the third big one, stakeholder alignment. It's vital. Think about the inherent conflicts. An administrator might need a system focused on perfect billing codes.
Well, the doctor just wants something that saves them 30 seconds per patient record.
Exactly. Trying to build one giant system to make both perfectly happy often means you fail both. But An MVP, it's tangible, it's real.
Something they can actually see and use.
Right. So those different groups, doctors, nurses, billing, IT, they can actually gather around something functional, like a simple digital pre-check-in tool, and give concrete feedback. It stops being years of arguing about abstract requirements documents.
Okay, that makes a ton of sense for the big players.
Yeah.
Now, let's switch gears. What about the health tech startup? Their challenge isn't usually decades of legacy systems. It's more about just surviving.
Right. Survival is the name of the game for startups. For them, the MVP is absolutely the core survival tool. First off, they desperately need to validate market demand.
Prove that someone actually wants this thing.
Yes. The VC world, especially in health, is brutal. A founder might have this brilliant idea, maybe for remote patient monitoring. But if their MVP doesn't quickly show that clinics are interested, or patients will use it, or someone might pay for it,
And the funding dries up.
the startup dies. Simple as that. The MVP is their proof, their receipt that the market actually cares.
And that proof is what gets them their next round of funding.
It's the leverage for securing funding. Investors need to see traction, showing even a small group of users actively adopting the MVP. That can be the difference between raising that crucial Series A or just running out of runway.
But there's that unique healthcare hurdle, again, the regulations. That must hit startups hard.
It's arguably the biggest killer of early-stage health tech companies. An MVP forces them onto the regulatory learning curve right away. They can't ignore it.
What happens if they do? If they wait?
Disaster. If a startup builds their whole product and then tries to figure out IPA or get FDA clearance if it's a medical device, they're often looking at incredibly expensive rework. Sometimes it's impossible to fix without starting over.
Ouch.
Yeah. So the MVP process makes them engage legal and compliance experts early. Build it right, build it small, build it compliant from the start. It minimizes those nasty, potentially company-ending surprises down the road.
Okay, so the why is clear for both sides.
Right.
Let's get into the what. How do you actually build this thing? This is where it gets really interesting for me. How do you keep something minimal, but also legally watertight and clinically safe? Seems like a contradiction.
It does feel like one, but it's not about cutting corners on the essentials. It's about focusing only on the essentials. Unlike typical software, these healthcare MVPs, they need this blend of tech, clinical input, and legal foresight baked in from day one.
Right, so what are the absolute must-have components, even in that very first stripped-down version?
We can break it down into 4 core components that have to be there, even if they start basic.
Okay, let's start with compliance and security architecture. This feels like the biggest tension point. Standard MVP thinking is often build fast, break things, iterate. How does that possibly work with IP?
It doesn't, not directly. You can't break things with patient data. So you build small, but you build securely. Delaying the privacy architecture, that's probably the single costliest mistake you can make in health tech.
So privacy by design has to be there from the get-go.
Absolutely. Even the MVP needs basic data encryption. It needs proper user authentication, who is accessing what. It needs audit logs. Patient consent flows need to be clear and managed correctly. If your very first feature is, say, secure messaging between patient and doctor.
That message exchange has to be secure, auditable, compliant right out of the gate.
No question. Okay, second component, the user side. User interface and UX. We touched on clinicians being tough users.
Right, they're overworked, stressed. They won't tolerate clunky software.
Zero tolerance for friction. If your shiny new tool makes them click 6 times for something they currently scribble on a notepad in 5 seconds, they will just ignore it. Doesn't matter how smart the back-end AI is.
So the design has to be super simple, intuitive.
And this is critical. It needs to be piloted with a small group of actual end users, doctors, nurses, whoever will use it. You need to watch them. Does it fit their real workflow? Or are you forcing them into some idealized process that just doesn't work in a busy clinic? It has to match their routine.
Okay, component 3, the headache for every hospital IT department.
Yeah.
Integration capability. Your MVP can't just float in isolation, right? It needs to talk to the existing systems.
Yeah. The EHR, the lab system, billing, it's an ecosystem. This is where we need to get slightly technical, but it's crucial. You need standards.
APIs.
Yes, but specifically, you need to be thinking about FHIR, fast healthcare interoperability resources, even in the MVP stage.
Why FHIR specifically? What's wrong with older standards or just custom APIs?
Well, Older standards like HL7v2 were quite rigid. They often needed these complex, expensive, custom translation layers just to get two systems talking. FHIR is built on modern web standards, things like JSON, RESTful APIs. It's much more modular, much more standardized.
Meaning it's easier to connect things later.
Way easier. If your MVP's architecture isn't designed with FHIR in mind, you're essentially building a dead end. It might work for the pilot, but you'll hit a wall when you try to deeply integrate it with the hospital's main EHR system. It just won't scale.
Okay, that makes sense. Plan for future connections using the modern standard. And the final component. This feels uniquely healthcare.
It is clinical validation. If your MVP touches patient care, even indirectly, patient safety and trust are paramount.
So if it helps with diagnosis or treatment suggestions.
You need to validate those claims. That might mean small-scale pilot studies within the hospital. It might mean getting peer review from other clinicians. You absolutely need safe fallback mechanisms if the tool fails or gives bad advice.
Which might mean you deliberately limit the MVP's first functions.
Often, yes. You might start with purely administrative tasks, like that scheduling example, things that don't directly impact clinical decisions. You tackle the non-critical stuff first to manage that clinical safety risk carefully before moving into more sensitive areas.
Okay, so those are the building blocks. And let's talk about the friction in the real world. How do these requirements actually shape the day-to-day process of building and iterating? These challenges aren't just theoretical bumps. They sound like they define the entire product roadmap.
Oh, they absolutely define it. Take regulatory compliance again, Aquapay, GDPR. They can feel like handcuffs to a fast-moving development team.
So how do you mitigate that without compromising?
It's not about compromise, it's about early involvement and smart design. You sit down with your legal and compliance experts right at the beginning.
Right.
You define that privacy by design approach. Maybe that means you consciously decide not to store certain highly sensitive data elements in the MVP at all to reduce the compliance burden initially.
Smart. And what about that challenge of user adoption, getting those busy clinicians to actually use the thing?
It requires what I'd call radical empathy. You can't just design in a vacuum. You need to go shadow them, watch their current workflows, even the messy, inefficient-looking ones.
Ones they've developed over years to cope?
Exactly. And you design the MVT to fit into those routines as much as possible, at least initially. If you try to force some completely new, theoretically perfect process on them from day one, the tool will likely just sit there, unused. You have to design for the human reality, not the software ideal.
Okay, let's revisit those examples you mentioned earlier, but think about that iteration process. The teleconsultation scheduling MVP. What was the specific pain point that drove the next version?
Right, so the initial MVP was basic. Patient signs up, gets a video link, the doctor gets an email. Technically it worked, checkbox ticked.
Oh, yeah.
But the immediate feedback from clinicians was loud and clear. They were complaining they had to manually copy the video link, copy the appointment time, paste it into their separate Outlook or Google Calendar.
Creating new manual work.
Exactly. It took them maybe 3 to 5 minutes per appointment, and worse, it led to errors, wrong links, double bookings, high friction. So the MVP solved the core video call problem, but accidentally created a new, annoying calendar problem.
So the iteration wasn't about adding fancy new features. It was about fixing the friction the MVP itself caused.
Precisely. That very specific pain point, the manual calendar entry, directly drove the next iteration. Adding automated calendar integration, they only added that high-value integration after validating the basic teleconsult need was real and identifying the biggest workflow blocker.
Makes sense. What about the patient portal for lab reports?
Similar story. The MVP was super simple. Just let patients view their lab reports online. Basically, a secure PDF viewer, core function delivered.
But patients aren't doctors. They see elevated creatinine.
And they have no idea what it means. So what happened? Patients started calling the clinic constantly. Nurse, what does this word mean? Is this bad? The MVP worked, but it shifted the burden onto clinic staff answering basic questions.
So the friction was user confusion and increased staff workload.
Right. So the next iteration wasn't adding, say, appointment scheduling or bill pay to the portal. It was about adding value to the existing feature. They added interpretation notes, links to explanations in plain language, maybe even color coding for normal-abnormal ranges right there alongside the results. They solved the user confusion problem first.
And the medication reminder app example. That seems simpler on the surface.
It starts simple, sure. Input your meds, get time notifications, that's the basic MVP. But then you look at the usage data.
And what did it show?
It often showed people stopped using the app after a while. Why? Because managing meds is more than just reminders. Patients had to manually track when they needed refills, or they got a new prescription and weren't sure if it interacted with their existing ones. The simple reminder wasn't enough to manage the risk and complexity.
So the iteration wasn't just driven by feature requests, but by addressing safety and reducing the patient's management burden.
Exactly. The data justified adding features like refill tracking or maybe integrating basic drug interaction checkers. The app evolved from just a simple reminder into more of a medication management tool, enhancing safety. That continuous data collection proved the need for those more complex, safety-oriented features.
Okay, so this leads directly into measurement. We need to track more than just signups or clicks to justify moving beyond the MVP, especially here. What are the really key success metrics in this high-stakes environment?
The metrics absolutely have to tie back to those goals of safety, efficiency, and clinical value. Yes, you track adoption rate, how many users stick with it, are they using it regularly?
Standard stuff.
Standard, but you look deeper, are clinicians adopting it? That's often tougher. But then, crucially, you measure task efficiency. Did this tool actually reduce the time clinicians spend on a specific task?
Like charting or finding information.
Precisely. If you can show the MVP cut documentation time by, say, 25%, that's a hard ROI number you can take to hospital administrators. It's tangible value.
And then there's the metric that feels most critical for healthcare: error rate quality.
Non-negotiable. You must track if the tool leads to errors. Usability mistakes, data entry errors, near misses in clinical decisions, any compliance incidents related to the tool.
Because a mistake here isn't just lost revenue, it's potential patient harm.
Exactly. A truly successful healthcare MVP doesn't just work. It has to demonstrably reduce the potential for human error compared to the old way of doing things. We use all of this data adoption, efficiency errors in a regular cost versus benefit analysis.
To prove it's worth continuing development.
Right. To show that the gains, maybe reduced staff time, maybe better patient adherence leading to fewer hospital visits, clearly justify the significant ongoing costs of developing and maintaining regulated software.
Okay, so to wrap this all up for our listeners, what are the absolute essential best practices, the actionable things people need to remember if they're building an MVP in this space?
I'd boil it down to 4 key things. First, define clear hypotheses before you build anything. What specific pain point, what assumption are you actually testing?
Like, we believe nurses spend 45 minutes per shift manually checking inventory levels.
Exactly that level of specificity. The MVP is then laser focused on testing that specific belief, not boiling the ocean.
Okay, number 2.
Avoid the feature creep trap. This is probably the most common mistake. Don't overload the MVP with nice to haves. Stick ruthlessly to the absolute minimum needed to test your hypothesis safely and validate the core value. Keep it lean. Third, and maybe most important, security first. Privacy, security, compliance, bake them in from day one. Treat regulation not as a bureaucratic hurdle to jump later, but as a fundamental design requirement from the very beginning.
Because delaying it is technical debt with massive interest rates.
Massive, potentially fatal interest rates in the form of breaches or regulatory fines. And finally, fourth, think about scalability, even in the MVP.
Even if it's small.
Yes. The underlying architecture needs to be reasonably clean and modular. If you build a tangled mess just to get the MVP out fast, you might find you have to throw it all away and start over when you need to add features or handle more users. Plan for future growth, even if you're starting tiny. Use standards like FHIR we talked about.
So, to bring it all together.
The MVP in healthcare, it's just fundamentally different. It has to serve 3 masters right from the start: the user, the business need, and the regulator. It's not optional. It's the essential strategy for cutting down enormous risk and proving real, measurable ROI. It lets organizations build solutions that are proven safe before they become comprehensive.
Yeah, the big takeaway for me is that starting with an MVP here isn't just a lean startup tactic. It's really the standard operating procedure for doing this kind of development responsibly and safely. It's how you build that crucial trust with clinicians, with patients, by delivering something tangible, something reliable that actually solves a real problem right away.
Absolutely. And maybe that leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. If we know that this continuous iteration, this learning from real-world usage data, is so key to success in healthcare tech, What are the ethical boundaries? What are the logistical hurdles to speeding up that feedback loop even more? Maybe using AI, maybe using continuous deployment models common in other sectors.
How fast can we iterate without ever compromising clinical safety?
Exactly. And on the other side, what does the patient, the end user, need to understand and accept about the digital tools involved in their care potentially being, well, constantly evolving, not static, but always changing based on data? That's a big shift in thinking about medical tools.